Sara Lewis realized she was going to die the moment she saw him. An ordinary evening, an ordinary shift. The cafe was already closing, the streets were deserted, the air heavy with damp autumn chill. Sara turned the key in the lock, slipped it into her pocket, and only then did she notice him. Tall, thin, in a long black coat. He stood under the streetlight watching. Not at the storefronts, not at his phone, not at the road. At her. Sara quickly turned away and walked briskly toward the bus stop. Don't run. Don't show fear. Everything is fine. She heard the crunch of gravel behind her. Footsteps, heavy, confident. She quickened her pace. The footsteps quickened too. God, please, let there be a bus. The stop appeared ahead, old, peeling paint. Sara glanced at the schedule and felt her stomach drop. No more buses. The footsteps behind her stopped. Silence. She slowly turned around. He was gone. Sara took a deep breath and stepped back. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe he was just a passerby. And then a voice broke the silence, quiet, steady. You're alone. Sara spun around sharply. He stood 5 steps away. His face was hidden in shadow. Only his eyes, 2 bottomless black voids, were visible. Go away, she managed to choke out, stepping back. He took a step forward. She turned and ran. The voices in her head screamed, Where? Where? Ahead was only a dark alley, a concrete fence, a narrow passage between buildings. Sara dashed into it, tripped, scraped her knee, but got up and kept running. The footsteps behind her grew louder. He was running too. And then, a voice, low, raspy, too close. I'll count to 3. The world froze. 1, Sara saw a building entrance ahead. She grabbed the handle. Locked. 2, she darted in the other direction toward a rusty fence, climbed over, slicing her palms on the wire. Footsteps behind. Closer. 3. He grabbed her shoulder. Sara screamed, and then a door creaked open. An elderly man stepped out with his dog. The maniac let her go. Sara bolted inside, slammed the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She turned around. Through the glass he was smiling, and whispered, Next time you won't escape. And in the morning, there was a note under her door. You run well. We'll test that again soon. Sara Lewis woke up to a knocking sound. Knock, knock, knock. Dull, slow. She shot up in bed, heart pounding wildly. The room was dark, with only a faint glow from the streetlight seeping through the blinds. What was that sound? She held her breath. Knock, louder this time. On the window, Sara felt ice crawl through her veins. I live on the 8th floor. She slowly turned her head. He was there. A gaunt face, hollow black eyes, pale skin, smiling. Sara was paralyzed. The man's fingers tapped the glass again, slow and deliberate. Open up, Sara. She screamed, leapt from the bed, knocking over the nightstand, fumbling for her phone. Her trembling fingers dialed. Police! Help! There's a man at my window. 8th floor. Miss, please stay calm. That's impossible. She slowly turned her head. The window was empty. The maniac was gone. But on the glass, wet handprints remained. The police arrived 15 minutes later. They searched the apartment, checked the building entrance, went up to the roof. No sign of forced entry, one officer said, squinting at the window. But he was here. I saw him. Sara wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop shaking. The officer ran a finger across the glass, and then his expression changed. Sara stepped closer and saw it, written on the glass. I see you. The next morning, Sara fled the apartment. She moved in with her friend Emily, who lived on the other side of the city. Changed her SIM card, deleted her social media. For 2 days, everything was quiet, and on the 3rd, the doorbell rang. Are you expecting someone? Emily asked, raising an eyebrow. No. They exchanged nervous glances. Emily walked to the peephole, looked, and suddenly froze. There's no one there. But Sara already knew. He was there, and the real nightmare began when they heard the whisper through the door. "I told you. You won't escape." Emily recoiled from the door, her face pale as chalk. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Sara nodded, gripping the armrest so tightly her fingers turned white. Footsteps, heavy, slow. He wasn't in a hurry. He was enjoying this. Fingernails scraped against the door from the other side. Sara grabbed her phone, her trembling hands dialing 911. "Police! He's here! He's right outside the door!" "Miss, what's your location?" "At my friend's apartment. The address is—" "Hold on, the dispatcher is connecting you to an officer." Silence. Sara's eyes darted to the door. Everything had gone still. Emily gestured to her. "Look through the peephole." Sara shrank back. She didn't want to, but she stepped closer. Breathed in. Breathed out. Pressed her eye to the cold glass. The hallway was empty. Sara exhaled shakily. And then, someone looked in from the other side. Black eyes, pale skin. A smile. Sara screamed. She stumbled back, knocking over a vase. Emily lunged toward her, gripping her shoulders. "What? What is it?" Sara couldn't speak. She just pointed at the door. "There's no one there," Emily snapped, unlocking and yanking the door open. Empty. The hallway was completely empty. Not a soul, but a piece of paper lay on the doormat. Sara bent down. 2 words. "He's closer." A cold shiver ran down her spine. "We have to leave," she whispered. "Go where?" Emily stared at her in horror. Sara had no answer, but she knew one thing. He wouldn't stop. Sara and Emily bolted into action. Emily tossed her wallet, documents, and car keys into her bag. "We'll drive out of town. Find a motel." Sara nodded, shaking with fear. 10 minutes later, they rushed out of the apartment and jumped into the car. Emily slammed her foot on the gas. The city streets blurred past, headlights slicing through the darkness. Only when they reached the highway did Sara begin to relax. Silence. The car was warm, the radio murmuring about some traffic jam. "That's it," Emily muttered. "There's no way he followed us." Sara nodded, but her heart still pounded. She glanced into the side mirror and froze. Someone was sitting in the back seat. Him. Sara's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The maniac leaned forward. She saw his smile in the mirror's reflection. "You can't run, Sara." Emily had no idea. "Sara? What's wrong?" Sara screamed. Emily whipped her head around. The seat was empty. "Jesus, Sara, you're scaring me." Emily swerved to the shoulder and slammed the brakes. Sara gasped for air, clutching the seatbelt. He was there." "No, it's just your nerves." Emily grabbed her hand. "We're safe." Sara wasn't so sure, but they kept driving. Eventually, they reached a run-down roadside motel. Old, peeling paint, damp-smelling. But it had walls, a locked door. The sleepy receptionist barely looked up as he handed them a key. Room 306. They climbed to the second floor, slammed the door shut. Emily dropped onto the bed and exhaled. "That's it. Now he'll never find us." Sara nodded in silence, but then she stepped toward the mirror by the door and saw him, the maniac, standing just outside their door. His shadow loomed in the reflection. He raised his hand and knocked. Sara froze. Emily heard the knock too. "Oh God, is it him?" Sara slowly nodded. Bang! The motel door shuddered under a heavy blow. "Girls," a sleepy voice called from outside. Sara nearly sobbed with relief. Emily rushed to the door and flung it open. The motel receptionist stood there, groggy, disheveled, holding a set of keys. "Sorry for the late hour," he muttered. You forgot your key." Emily snatched the key and slammed the door shut. Sara was trembling. She slowly backed away and turned toward the window. Darkness. Only the faint yellow glow of the motel's distant streetlight illuminated the parking lot. And then, a tall figure in a long black coat. He was here. He knew exactly where they were. Sara's fingers clenched against the windowsill. She could feel his gaze. And then, two words appeared on the fogged-up glass. "Sara, open." She stumbled backward. "Emily." Emily rushed over, looked at the glass, then went pale. It's knock. Loud. Slow. Bang. 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 "But the receptionist left," Emily whispered. Sara swallowed hard. "Don't open it." Shaking, Emily pressed her eye to the peephole and froze. "There's no one there." Sara's stomach clenched. "No one?" Emily slowly backed away from the door, shaking her head. "The hallway is empty, completely empty." But then the knock came again. This time, it was coming from the bathroom, knocking from the bathroom. Dull, deep, knock, knock, knock. Emily let out a small scream and pressed herself against the wall. "Who's there?" Sara couldn't speak. She just stared at the bathroom door. White, closed. A sound came from inside, a slow, quiet scrape, like fingernails dragging across tile. "It's just the wind," Emily whispered. Sara slowly shook her head. "The wind doesn't scratch." They stood frozen, barely daring to breathe. Silence. Sara took a step forward. Emily grabbed her wrist. "Are you insane?" Sara didn't know what to do. But she knew one thing: if she didn't look, it would only get worse. She pressed her ear to the door. Nothing. Slowly she reached for the handle. Emily whimpered, "Don't open it." But it was too late. The door creaked open. The bathroom was empty. The light flickered. The mirror was fogged over. Sara stepped inside. Emily stayed behind, fists clenched. "Well?" Sara reached out and wiped the fogged glass, and froze. Someone else stood behind her. Not Emily. Him. The maniac. Tall, hollow-eyed, watching her through the mirror. And then he smiled. Sara gasped. She whirled around. Nothing. But in the mirror he remained. He leaned in closer and whispered, "You shouldn't have opened the door, Sara." Then his hand came out of the mirror and grabbed her wrist. Sara screamed. Emily burst into the bathroom, yanking Sara back. The mirror shattered. Glass shards scattered across the floor, each tiny fragment reflecting his smile. Sara clutched her chest, gasping. Emily was trembling beside her. What the hell was that? Sara didn't know, but she knew one thing. He was inside now, and there was no way out. The room was silent, but it was the wrong kind of silence. The kind that sent chills down your spine. The kind where you could hear someone else's breathing, but not your own. Sara clutched her wrist. Deep red marks were imprinted there, as if something had really grabbed her from inside the mirror. Emily stared at the shattered glass in the bathroom. Every fragment reflected his face. He was everywhere. "We're leaving." Sara grabbed her jacket, yanked Emily by the hand. "Right now." Emily didn't resist. They sprinted out of the motel, the cold air stinging their faces. Their car sat in the parking lot, dark, locked. Sara fumbled through her pockets, trying to find the keys. "Hurry," Emily whispered. Her hands were shaking. The keys slipped, fell onto the asphalt. Sara bent down to pick them up, and at that moment, the car's interior light turned on. Someone was inside. They froze. The headlights flickered, and then, on the fogged-up windshield, words appeared, written from the inside. "I'm here." "Run," Emily screamed, but Sara couldn't move. She watched as the car locks clicked on their own. Lock, unlock, bang. All the doors suddenly flew open at the same time, and from the darkness inside, he stepped out, the maniac, smiling. Sara couldn't breathe. He took a slow step forward. "I told you, Sara. You can't run," she screamed. They ran blindly, feet pounding against the asphalt. Nothing but an empty highway and darkness surrounded them. A thin mist crept along the ground, curling around the road in a ghostly haze. "We need someone. A car. The police," Emily gasped, glancing back. But the road was empty. Completely. As if the entire world had vanished. Sara looked over her shoulder. He was walking. Unhurried. Calm. As if he had all the time in the world. Following them. And then, headlights. In the distance. A car. They ran toward it. The lights grew closer. Sara waved frantically, screaming, "Stop! Help us!" The car slowed. Sara sprinted faster. But as they neared, as the headlights illuminated the driver's seat, Sara's breath stopped. Behind the wheel. He sat there, smiling. "Hop in, girls. I'll give you a ride," Sara screamed. Emily yanked her hand and they bolted into the darkness. Sara's lungs burned. This isn't possible. He was there. But he was here. How? How? And then she understood. Running was useless. He was everywhere. Sara and Emily ran blindly, their breath ragged. The cold air burned their lungs. Their legs trembled from exhaustion. But they couldn't stop. He was following them, unhurried, as if he knew. They were already trapped. Sara glanced over her shoulder. The car's headlights had vanished. Now, just total darkness. And somehow that was worse. "We have to hide," Emily whispered. Sara scanned their surroundings. An empty road, a forest. Not much of a choice. "The woods," she hissed. They veered off the road, crashing through the undergrowth, their feet sinking into damp earth. Branches tore at their clothes, scratched their skin. But behind them was him, and that meant stopping was not an option. They ran deeper, deeper, until suddenly an old, abandoned house loomed before them. Crooked walls, glassless windows. Sara's breath caught in her throat. This house wasn't as empty as it looked. But behind them, he was there. No choice. Inside, Emily squeezed through a narrow gap between the broken boards. Sara followed. Inside it was cold and silent. Too silent. Sara felt it instantly, like this house had been waiting for them. Emily leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. Now what? Sara didn't know, but she knew one thing. He was near. She listened. Only the faint whisper of the wind. But when she turned toward the window, he was staring at her. Standing right outside, his face was cloaked in shadow, but she knew he was smiling. Sara choked on air. "Don't look at the window," she screamed. Emily was too late. She was already looking, and she couldn't look away. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. Sara grabbed her by the shoulders and yanked her back. But Emily wouldn't move. She just kept staring, as if something was staring back. Sara shook her harder. "Emily! Emily, snap out of it!" But her friend only parted her lips and whispered, "He's calling me," Sara screamed. She clamped her hands over Emily's eyes. But it was too late. Emily slowly turned and walked into the darkness of the house. No words, no sound, as if something had summoned her. Sara was alone. And then, a soft, steady knock at the window. Knock, knock, knock. She didn't dare breathe. But then, a voice, not outside, inside her head. "Now you're alone, Sara. And I'm coming for you." Sara was alone. The house, dark, the forest, silent. But outside the window, he was still there, standing motionless, unhurried, as if waiting. Sara couldn't breathe. Emily was gone. Her last words echoed in Sara's mind. "He's calling me." With shaking hands, she fumbled in her pocket for her phone. No signal. Of course. She turned. This house wasn't a refuge. It was a trap. She had to leave. She bolted from the house into the woods. But the forest had changed. The trees stood closer together. The path was gone. She realized then he was playing with her. So she walked and walked and walked. But the forest never ended. Then, lights, up ahead, a road. Sara ran toward the glow, stumbling onto the pavement. Road signs, wrong. The letters were twisted, like a language that shouldn't exist. But the last sign, that one was clear. Don't stop. Then, an engine. Sara spun around, headlights, a car emerging from the darkness. Black. A cold shiver crept up her spine. Was it him? The car slowed. The window rolled down. An old man. You shouldn't be here, he said. Sara swallowed hard. Help me, please. The man shook his head. Get in, girl. Sara hesitated. Then she turned and saw him. He was walking toward her, step by step, slow, calm, like he knew she would never escape. She lunged into the car. The old man slammed the gas pedal. Tires screeched. They sped down the road. Sara looked back. He stood in the road, watching, and then he smiled. Who is he? Sara gasped. The old man didn't answer. He just drove. Through the forest, through the night, as if he knew exactly where to go. And then he spoke. You stepped into his game. Sara stiffened. What game? He's not a man, girl. He's a shadow. What? A shadow that chooses. Sara's hands turned ice cold. Do you know how to stop him? The old man slowly turned his head. There was no hope in his eyes. No. The car screeched to a stop. I'm not driving any farther. Sara looked out the window. A city. Where? Is this? The old man didn't answer. You have to get out. Why? For the first time, he looked directly at her. Because if I drive any farther, he'll follow me. Sara's fingers clenched around the door handle. You can't outrun him, girl. She threw the door open and stumbled out. The door slammed shut, and the car vanished into the darkness. Sara turned. The city stretched before her. But something was wrong. The streetlights flickered dimly. The buildings stood silent, empty. No cars, no people, no sounds. As if the city had been frozen in time. As if it had been dead for a long time. And then Sara realized this wasn't a city. This was another trap. And he was already here. Sara stood in the middle of the street. A dead city surrounded her. Silence. The wind dragged scraps of newspapers across the pavement, but the pages were blank, as if this city had never been alive. She took a step forward. The street lights flickered. For a brief second, the entire street plunged into darkness, and when the lights came back, he was there, across the road, tall, dressed in black, watching her, smiling. Sara gasped. She ran into the nearest building. Inside, emptiness, as if everything had disappeared years ago. A thick layer of dust covered the floor. Torn wires dangled from the walls. But the most terrifying thing, a cup of coffee sat on a table, still warm, as if someone had just left, or worse, as if he had been waiting for her. Footsteps, slow, heavy, coming toward her. Sara dashed down the hallway. Ahead, an elevator. The doors stood open. No buttons inside, only one word. Descend. Sara trembled, but he was already entering the building. She had only one choice. She stepped inside. The doors slammed shut, and the elevator began to move. Down. He didn't follow her down. Sara felt it instantly. This floor was his limit. But why? The elevator trembled. The light flickered. Sara curled into the corner. 10 seconds, 20, 50. Then, a crash. The elevator slammed to a stop. The doors slid open. Before her, a hallway. Dim lights flickered against the damp walls, the floor covered in dirty, bare footprints. Someone had been here, or worse, someone was still here. Sara stepped inside, a sound, whispers, too faint to understand. But she knew they were talking about her. She walked forward. The hallway led to one door, old, wooden, scratched, as if someone had tried to escape. Sara reached out. Her fingers brushed the handle, and then the door jerked from the inside. She clapped her hands over her mouth, held in a scream. Something was behind that door, and it was breathing, slow, deep, waiting. Sara took a step back, too late. A voice, cold, calm, familiar. "You shouldn't have come down, Sara." She spun around, nothing, only a mirror, and in it, him, staring at her, smiling. And then he stepped out. Sara screamed. Sara screamed. But the sound vanished into the darkness. The corridor blacked out, as if the light itself had been afraid, and fled. She saw nothing. No walls, no floor, only his eyes, black, empty, staring straight at her. "Are you afraid of the dark, Sara?" His voice, laughter, software, slow, like he already knew. This was the end. "Don't worry, you'll get used to it soon." Sara shivered. The darkness moved. Something crawled over her legs, clawed feet, tails, slick against her skin. Rats. She couldn't scream. The rats hissed. But worse, they whispered. "Stay with us, Sara. We need your skin. We need your face." She jerked backward. Hands reached out from the shadows, gripped her shoulders, and he leaned in, whispered into her ear. "You know the funniest part?" She didn't want to know, but he told her anyway. "You're already dead." Sara stood alone among those who didn't breathe. People lined both sides of the street, staring, smiling, the same way he did, with the same black, bottomless eyes. And the city breathed. She heard it. A deep, drawn-out sound, like the entire city was one giant organism. "Do you feel it?" She flinched. The voice came from everywhere, from the walls, from the windows, from the rusted pipes. "The city is alive, Sara, and it wants you to stay." She ran. She tore through the streets. But the city shifted. Buildings moved. Sidewalks stretched and curled like skin. Streetlights whispered. And then she saw something worse. A poster on one of the buildings. Sara stepped closer and froze. It was her. A missing person poster. Her own photo. And beneath it, Sara Lewis, missing since October 13th. Last seen here. She clamped a hand over her mouth. That was today. Or had she already been here for a long time? Funny joke, isn't it? She spun around. He was there, calm, dark. He wasn't chasing her anymore. Now, he was waiting, like he knew she would give up. "Want to know how much time has passed?" She didn't answer, but his smile widened. "Look at the windows, Sara." Slowly, she raised her head and saw, behind every window, people. But not just people. Herself. Hundreds of her. Thousands. Sara in every window, smiling, waiting. She squeezed her eyes shut. "Why me?" And then, he answered, "Because you've been here before." "You just forgot." Sara shivered. Had she already been here? Had she forgotten? How was that possible? She forced herself to breathe. Stay calm. Don't look at the windows. But they were moving. The reflections knocked on the glass. Software, rhythmic, knock, 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 like a heartbeat. She curled into herself. "What is this place?" He laughed. "You still don't understand?" Sara didn't answer, but he leaned in closer. "This city is for people like you, for those who got lost between worlds." She trembled. I'm alive. He shook his head. Are you sure? The city shifted. Walls crept inward. Asphalt cracked under her feet. The city breathed deeper. And then Sara understood. She had to get out. She ran. Anywhere. Just away. But the city refused to let her go. Where are you going, Sara? Laughter filled the streets. Buildings stirred. Roads disappeared. She couldn't find an exit. She was trapped. So she stopped. I'm not afraid of you. You're just a shadow. He stared at her. The city stilled. The streets fell into silence, like he was waiting, like he was giving her a choice. But was the choice real? Or just another game? And then a voice, software, a whisper. Sara. She spun around. Emerging from the alley, Emily. But something was wrong. Emily smiled, with black, hollow eyes. Sara froze. This couldn't be Emily. But she stood there, same clothes, same face, but her eyes, black as the night, and that smile, just like his. You left me, Sara. Emily's voice was the same, but hollow, an echo of something dead. No. Sara backed away. Emily stepped forward. You're not running? She tilted her head, studying her. Strange. You always run. A chill crept up Sara's spine. This wasn't her friend. This wasn't Emily. You're not Emily. Her voice trembled, but she had to say it. Whatever stood before her, it wasn't real. Emily's smile widened. Then who am I, Sara? Sara didn't answer. Emily stepped closer. Let me help you. Her voice changed, deeper, rougher, his voice. And then Sara understood. Oh God, Emily wasn't Emily. It was him. It had always been him. Playing with her. Like always. Like always. Sara turned and ran. She didn't want to hear his laughter, but it was everywhere, from the windows, from the walls, from the ground beneath her feet. The city laughed with him. She darted into a dark alley. Another. She didn't know where she was going, just away. But then, the road ended. A wall, no doors, no windows, a dead end. She was trapped. Sara turned and saw him, standing in the passage, tall, dark. He wasn't hiding anymore. He had come for her. It's over now, Sara. Sara was alone with him. A dark alley, the city silent, the air heavy. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was just waiting. It's over now, Sara. He said it quietly, like it wasn't a threat but a fact, like he already knew how this story ended, and Sara realized he always knew. What are you? She barely whispered. Her voice betrayed her. He smiled. The right question. He took a step forward. But you won't like the answer. Sara backed against the wall. No way out. She couldn't run anymore. And for the first time, she wondered, did she ever have a chance? He never rushed, he played, because he knew. Eventually she would break. And now, he was finally close. You fought for a long time. You were a good little toy. But now it's time to sleep, Sara. He raised his hand, and the world went black. Silence. Sara felt nothing. Darkness wrapped around her. Cold, emptiness. And then, a whisper. Sara. Her eyes opened. She saw a bed, her room, soft morning sunlight, her alarm clock on the nightstand, as if it had all been just a dream. She sat up, took a deep breath. Her hands shook. A dream. That's all it was. She reached for her phone. 7:13 a.m. A normal day. A normal world. Her world. She exhaled. A nightmare. A horrible, awful nightmare. But just a nightmare. She swung her legs off the bed. Warm floor. The smell of coffee from the kitchen. Emily was downstairs. Alive. Relief washed over her. It wasn't real. She walked toward the window. Sunlight spilled across the glass. The city was alive. Cars. People. Like nothing had ever happened. But when she looked at her reflection, she froze. Her reflection didn't move. It just smiled, and it spoke one word. "Awake?" Sara screamed. Sara froze. The door behind her creaked open. A cold, dark presence seeped from inside, thick, sticky, alive. She didn't dare breathe. "You won't wake up." The words echoed in her skull. She shut her eyes. She wouldn't look, but she knew. He was there, standing behind her, smiling. Sara spun around and saw nothing. The door led to black nothingness, a place without beginning or end. But the worst part, she recognized this dark corridor. She had walked it before. "What is this?" she whispered. A voice, not spoken, but inside her mind. "This is your way back," Sara shivered. Back where? But she already knew the answer. She had never left this place. She had been here all along. Sara stepped toward the corridor. The darkness swallowed her. The air thickened, heavy as tar. Whispers slithered through the walls. "She has returned. She never left. The city remembers her." She walked deeper. The walls breathed. And then she saw a door, familiar, black, scratched. Someone had tried to escape. Sara reached for the handle, but the voice came again. "Are you ready to see the truth?" She didn't know, but she had no choice. She opened the door. She stepped inside and saw herself. A dark room. In the center, a chair, and sitting on it, her, thin, pale, empty-eyed. She didn't move, didn't blink, just waited. Sara took a step closer. Her fingers trembled. She reached out. And then her reflection spoke. "They told you that you wouldn't wake up, but you didn't listen. Do you want to know the truth?" Sara couldn't speak. Her reflection smiled, and then it said, "You're dead, Sara." Sara froze. Number. This is a lie." She grabbed the reflection's shoulders. "That's not true." But the other Sara only stared back, unblinking, emotionless. "Sara, how long have you been here?" She didn't know. She couldn't remember. Days? Hours? Years? "You thought you escaped? But you always come back. Because you never left." Sara shut her eyes. Is this a game or the truth? She didn't know. But when she opened her eyes, she was back in the city. The same alley, the same street, the same empty people. They watched, waiting. And then she saw him, standing on the rooftop. Tall, black-cloaked, hollow-eyed, and smiling. "Now you understand, Sara. You're here forever." Sara couldn't breathe. The world shrank to a single point. Her body felt numb. Forever. She couldn't believe it. This was a lie. "You're lying," she screamed, but her voice vanished into the emptiness. The city didn't listen. The people didn't blink. They just waited. He jumped from the rooftop, landed soundlessly, like a shadow instead of a man. Sara staggered backward. He watched her, like a hunter watches prey. "You want to leave?" He tilted his head. "You think you can?" He spread his arms. "Go on, Sara." He laughed, because he knew she couldn't. Sara turned and ran. She didn't think, didn't question, just ran. Streets blurred, sidewalks twisted. But she couldn't find the edge. The city had no end, like it was growing around her. Then she saw a door, standing alone, in the middle of the square. It had to be an exit. It had to be a way out. She lunged forward, and then the people moved. They turned toward her all at once, their faces melted like dripping wax. Their mouths opened. But instead of screams, there was only a whisper. "You won't leave. You won't leave. You won't leave." She clamped her hands over her ears. She lunged for the door. Her fingers grasped the handle. "Are you sure?" The voice was right at her ear. She spun around. He was there, smiling. "Do you really think there's an exit?" He leaned closer. And what if it leads to something worse? Sara shook. Her fingers tightened around the handle. You can open it, Sara. But think, what if it's just the next trap? Sara froze. She stared at the door. She wanted to open it. But what if he wasn't lying? What if there was something worse waiting? He leaned in and whispered the words that shattered her reality. You've opened it before. Sara's blood turned to ice. No, that wasn't true. She had never been here before. She had never opened this door. But why were her hands shaking? Why did her heart feel like it was collapsing? Why did her fingers recognize the handle? And then she remembered. She had opened it before. She had seen what was behind it, and she had already made a choice. She had chosen to stay. See, Sara? His smile widened. You always choose to stay. The door vanished. The city returned. The people froze again. And Sara understood. She was trapped forever. Sara stood in the middle of a city that didn't exist. The door was gone. There was no way out. She was here again, just like always, just like every time she forgot, every time this happened again. How many times have I lived through this? Her voice shook. She asked, even though she didn't want the answer. He smirked. Do you really want to know? Sara trembled, but she already knew. This city, this trap, it didn't just keep her here. It played with her. It made her forget. Again and again, it erased her memories. It made her believe this was all new. But the truth was, she had been here for so much longer than she could imagine. She squeezed her eyes shut. Terror burned in her chest. How many times, Sara? He leaned in closer. 100? 1,000? 10,000? She shivered. No, but she wasn't sure anymore. She felt it. This conversation had already happened. What do I do? She whispered. How do I escape? His smile widened. You can't, Sara. You chose this. She refused to believe it. She couldn't believe it. How could she have chosen this? How could anyone choose an endless nightmare? But deep inside, she felt the truth. She remembered something. Fragments of the past. How she had opened that door. How she had looked beyond it. And how she had shut it again. Because what was on the other side was even worse. Sara shook. She tried to remember. But the city fought back. It pressed against her mind, like it didn't want her to know the truth. She shut her eyes. She had to remember. And then she saw it. The door. That moment. She had opened it. She had looked beyond, and she had shut it. Why? What had she seen? A voice whispered inside her head. You know the answer. You remember. But Sara didn't want to remember, because behind that door, was something worse than this city. What was there? She barely breathed the words. The voice only laughed. Are you sure you want to know? And then she saw it. The real world, people, buildings, the warmth of the sun, the fresh air. She was there. But she was dead. Her body lay motionless on the street. People stood around. A police car, an ambulance, and someone was closing her eyes. That's me. She shook. She couldn't breathe. Yes, Sara. You died. And then she understood. She had never chosen this city. She had simply refused to leave. She had been too afraid of what waited beyond the door. Because behind that door was death. Sara stood at a crossroad. Now she remembered everything. She was dead. This city wasn't a place. It was a trap. A prison for those who refused to let go, for those who couldn't accept their death. She remembered that day, how she had died, how her body remained in the real world, and how her mind had ended up here, how she had tried to run, but the city never let her go, because she had been holding on to it. Now, she knew the truth. Now, she knew what she had to do. She turned to him. He was silent. He had always known. He was just waiting. Are you the city? The realization hit her all at once. He wasn't just a stalker. He wasn't just a shadow. He was the city itself. He was the nightmare. He was the thing that held her here. He smiled. I'm giving you a choice. You can stay, or you can leave. Sara shivered. She knew he wasn't lying. She could leave. But if she left, she would disappear. She would leave this world forever. What happens if I choose death? He tilted his head. You wake up. Sara took a deep breath. She closed her eyes, and she made her choice. She walked toward the door, the one she had always shut. But now she wasn't afraid. She opened it and saw light. The city trembled. The people screamed, but not with voices. They screamed in whispers, like this world refused to let her go, like it was dying with her. She stepped forward. The darkness vanished, and then she woke up. She gasped, sharp, desperate, like someone drowning. Light blinded her. She was lying down. A hospital bed, IV drip, machines beeping. Morning light spilled through the window, and beside her, Emily. Sara! Emily rushed to her side, gripping her hands. Oh my God, you're awake! Sara didn't understand. She had been there. She had been trapped. She had died, but she was alive. Emily's voice shook. You were in a coma for 2 weeks. After the accident, you were supposed to die, Sara. But you came back. Sara closed her eyes. She had escaped. She had woken up. But on the fogged-up window of her hospital room, something was written. 3 words. Sara's face went pale. She recognized the handwriting. She knew who wrote it. And in the hallway, beyond the doctors, a figure, tall, dressed in black, empty eyes, smiling. Thank you for listening to this terrifying story until the very end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss new spine-chilling tales. If this story gave you goosebumps, leave a like and share it with your friends. Maybe they're brave enough to read it too. More eerie and unsettling stories are coming very soon. The next nightmare is just around the corner. Are you ready to face the darkness?